Hi, everybody. Wow, this is the biggest crowd I've ever seen here. My name is Deborah Copaken Kogan, and my 6-word memoir is Hungered for War, Sated by Love. So, how I came to find myself on Valentine's Day, 1989, in a cave full of Afghani freedom fighters is a whole story unto itself, but suffice it to say, love was conspicuously absent from the narrative. Briefly, I met a boy on a beach and a man at a party, and being 22 years old and awfully naive, I equated age with maturity. The boy had invited me to come visit him in London, and the man had invited me, he was a photojournalist like I was, living in Paris, and he'd invited me to come to sneak over the border into Afghanistan with him to cover the end of the war with the Soviets. Now, I hungered for love, definitely, no question, but I also, at that time in my life, I hungered for experience, I hungered for assignments, I hungered for a photographic subject, I hungered for food. And so since the man's offer included all of these things, I chose him. I've since learned that, at least where love is concerned, choosing the all-inclusive package only really works at Club Med. That the man was living with his girlfriend at the time also hinted at a certain moral lassitude, which, trust me, I was in no position to judge. But really, I had no way of knowing that he would, once we were in Peshawar, beat me over the head with a telephone receiver. Or that he would abandon me in Pakistan and head into Afghanistan by himself, leaving me to find my way into the country by myself. So, that's the backstory. There we were, in our cave, February 14th, 1989, somewhere in the Hindu Kush. In this cave, the way one did back then, which was you had to sneak in over the border, smuggled in illegally. I was wearing a burqa. And then after a few weeks of traveling by broken down truck, donkey, and hoofing it, this was all through a minefield, and that's how you got there. Outside the cave, the air was frigid. Inside the cave, the air was frigid. We settled down for a restless night's sleep under the loving gaze of a portrait of the Ayatollah Khomeini. Inside my allegedly Arctic-proof sleeping bag, I was wearing 3 pairs of thermal underwear, 2 sweaters, a hat, a pair of blood-encrusted jeans, and several weeks' worth of dirt, and a furrowed brow over the queasy rumblings in my stomach. I wondered whether the mutton fat I'd slurped up for dinner that night was, as I'd feared, both undercooked and swarming with bacteria. But hunger makes one do strange things. So, one of the mujahideen, he borrowed my transistor radio and he tuned it to the Pashto version of the BBC. Now, never having studied Pashto, here's what I heard. Blah, 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 Salman Rushdie. Blah, blah, Salman Rushdie. Blah, blah, blah. Suddenly, the men were sitting up, bolt upright, gesticulating wildly and yelling. I poked on the shoulder of the one soldier in there, Hashim, who knew the slightest bit of English, and I said, "What's going on?" He said, "Shh." He was trying to listen to the rest of the report under the noise of all that shouting. I shushed. I knew Salman Rushdie was a writer, but why was a book review leading the top of the BBC? More importantly, why was everyone so upset about it? I tapped Hashim again. I couldn't shush any longer. I said, I'm sorry, why is everyone so angry? He looked at me and the language barrier was huge, but he said, okay, Miss Deborah, Salman Rushdie, he writes very bad book. A bad book, so no one will buy it. What's the big deal? I didn't understand. So, the soldiers were now screaming, they were shouting, they were angry. And now, what? They were grabbing their Kalashnikovs and heading out of the cave to shoot them. I poked on Hashim's shoulder one more time. I said, listen, I'm sorry, I don't get it. What's going on? And he said, oh, you know, the language barrier again. He's like, okay, Miss Deborah, Salman Rushdie, he write very bad book. Bad to Allah. Then he smiled as if it were all clear. And he said, we Muslim must kill him. Then he headed out of the cave to join the others, all of whom were shooting off hundreds of rounds of ammunition into the starry night sky, yelling, Allah Akbar, God is great, followed by words which I would soon find out meant, down with America. I went out there and I tried explaining to the soldiers that Salman Rushdie is either British or Indian, depending on your cultural bent, but certainly he was not American, and weren't we funding this war of theirs anyway? The men started shouting again, Allah Akbar, and the rage and the bloodlust was palpable. It was frightening. How could these men, I wondered, how could these unbelievably kind men who'd been incredibly hospitable to me over the past month and a half, taking care of me, how did they suddenly turn into a pack of rabid, American-hating wolves? I had so much yet to learn about the world and about hunger. I retreated back into the cave because I was afraid of getting hit by the bullets which were now shooting back down from the sky. And with frostbitten fingers, I tuned the radio to the English version of the BBC, and I heard the word fatwa for the very first time. The very first time. My stomach started rumbling again, and I pictured Salman Rushdie back in London listening to this same report. And all I could think was, how does one survive a fatwa? How would the man live, work, eat, love? I pictured the boy in London sitting on the steps of Piccadilly Circus, young and free in a way that Salman Rushdie would no longer be. I wondered what my friends were doing back in Paris. I imagined, you know, romantic tete-a-tetes blurred through the windows of fogged-up cafes. I pictured hot soup, plates of crispy duck. Suddenly, I was barfing undigested mutton fat all over my fancy sleeping bag. It was like The Exorcist. And I vowed that if I ever got out of that cave, I would find that boy in London and I would go and visit him. A month later, back in Paris, 20 pounds lighter from dysentery, I called him. I told him I was coming and flying into London to meet with some photo editors who wanted to look at my stuff, which was true, but really I just wanted to see him. What I didn't tell him was that imagining our reunion had kept me alive. A few days later, we met at the Tottenham Court Road tube station, and he showed up wearing a worn leather jacket and a loving smile. We would subsequently lose one another, as one did back then in that pre-Facebook era, from scraps of paper misplaced and answering machine messages erased. But that afternoon at the tube station, when he held out his hand and said, "Come on, let's go get something to eat. You look like you're starving," I clasped his fingers in mine, and I gave myself over willingly, with intent, to the hunger. Thank you very much.